Hello and welcome to Dada and Surrealism for LMU students. As you know, we've already started Dada. We'll pretty much finish it, but we are going to go on to the next person to wrap things up before hitting the surreal trail, and that's Marcel Duchamp, who is uh, Dada's most prominent visual artist, even though he's not actually, we'll get into that in a second, but he's certainly an articulate spokesperson. And we are going to be talking about the ready-mades, and there's one, the bicycle wheel right behind him. And usually in art history class, what they talk about is number one, how it revolutionized century art and art forever, which is certainly true. And the art history classes also talk about how what they've done is created something. What Marcel Duchamp did was create something out of things that he didn't himself make. He just transformed them. And now what he did in terms of transforming them is, you have to remember that we are now in a design history class. And so design is form follows function. And so you take a look at what else is going on there, and you see that what used to be a stool for sitting in is now been rendered useless. And part of what used to be a means of pedestrian transportation is now also not functioning because it has been removed from its design. And here's what's happening also, though. One of the things that you have about this is that in a way it's working in another way. If you were to actually be able to touch things when you were in a museum, if you could touch the art, which Duchamp was a big fan of, you could go up to that wheel and you could start spinning it around endlessly. And that is something happening that couldn't have happened before with the wheel in its original state. So keep that in mind as we go on. And we're going to start out by talking about how 5 years after Picasso revolutionized Cubism, really, in my view, brought about modernism with Demoiselle, that Duchamp came up with his Nude Descending a Staircase, which got a whole lot of people bent out of shape in people in the art world, which is always a good thing. And one of the things that was mystifying about it for traditionalists, for the academics, or even for the people who were, okay, I can kind of see where Demoiselle's going, is that this is the first time a nude is up and in action. You take a look through, flip through your art history books, and you'll see that, yeah, there are plenty of naked women, obelisks and whatnot, just lying around. And even here we have Picasso having his band of 5 women waiting to see if he's going to choose them, sitting down, standing around, and that's about as far as they get. But then here we have the nude in action. And what kind of action is it? Well, it's part Cubism, it's part Futurism. It's, as I say, Duchamp cannot be pigeonholed into any one category of fine art movements. And so another thing is that there were people who were outraged about it for all sorts of different reasons. And, as I said, one of them is, hey, women in art are meant to be passive. They are not meant to go and walk down the stairs. So how dare you show this nude? Okay, 2 things there. Thing number 1 is he used the word nude. And if you know anything about Duchamp, you know that he really enjoyed playing with the male-female role playing. In fact, he had another identity, a nom de plume, Rose C'est la Vie, that's Selavy, and photographed by Man Ray was taken of him, and we'll get to Man Ray momentarily. But here's the thing, that nude isn't necessarily woman. There was the assumption. Okay, but people were outraged about it in the art world. People just in your normal day-to-day living. Here, this appeared in a newspaper in New York. You know it's New York because the subtitle of the cartoon, The Rude Descending a Staircase, is a near cubist interpretation of a daily subway demonstration. So, yeah, as we all know, absolutely every single person in New York is rude and bushy. But in any event, it makes the point. And, other people who were verbally visualizing what they saw called it an explosion in a shingle factory, and all of which which I'm pretty sure was delighting Duchamp, because with a single panel cartoons like this, it's definitely important to point out that Duchamp started out his art career as a single panel cartoonist. And the title is actually, and if you look down at the lower left of Nude, you will actually see the title is painted on the canvas, just as a caption is usually part of a canvas. That was 1912. And then in going back to 1905, you can see this is just one example of the many cartoons that Duchamp was drawing back then for publication in magazines. And I'm sure if it was around the turn of the century and we actually were able to translate and read that caption that he wrote under there before having a typeset, it would make us all hysterical with laughter. And so there's the deal. It's like Nude Descending a Staircase. Yeah, it's a title and it's also a caption, okay? Because we're now in the design history class where words and images have all sorts of interesting interactions if we pay close enough attention. And which leads us to one of the ones that, again, art history classes, will tell the story. And actually, the way I like to tell the story about what this graffitoed reproduction of Mona Lisa is all about is that I actually saw it happen in person. The effect that Duchamp was after. I was in a museum, and there were two men who approached the painting, and for the first time, apparently because they looked at it for a bit, and then one of them lowered his eyes, and I could see his mouth moving. And then he started laughing, and he poked his friend next to him and pointed out to the writing underneath, more graffiti, right? And the deal there. And so then they were both laughing because LA, when you pronounce those 5 letters in French, in English, it means she's got a hot ass. And then you look at the fact that Duchamp, who loved the ambiguity between the sexes, has painted a mustache on Mona, which is partly about the fact that Da Vinci was gay, and so reference to that. And anyway, I could go on, but basically the one of the things going on there is that Duchamp is deliberately confusing sexual roles as well as captioning his cartoon in a quite obvious way. Okay, so again, cartoonist. And other things going on too. This is the bicycle wheel. Well, actually, a reproduction that he made, Duchamp, because the original was lost. One was made in 1913. So we look at that again and we see, we take a look at the body of somebody's work, the way you, as people who are reporting on your midterm and final designers, go and look at the body and see how these things relate to each other. What somebody was doing in one point in their career is also happening in different ways. And that's the evolution. So take a look at the two of these next to each other. And here you have basically a sitting, both literally and figuratively, because take a look, there's the head, the stool is the body with the arms crossed, there you can see the shoulders, right? And the device that's holding the wheel to the stool is an upswept mustache, which I guess we'll be looking at pretty soon, because we're heading towards Dada, we're heading towards surrealism, and of course, Mr. Dali. Okay, so there's that, and then there's this. Okay, so this is again one of those things where what you hear in your art history class is going to be different than what you hear in your design history class, because in your art history class, you will hear truths. You will hear that this one particular piece of porcelain managed to revolutionize the entire notion of what fine art constitutes. And the fact of the matter is that it has gone and done that. And there are just so many other examples that you can give up until this day to show its enormous influence. And a couple of people handed in papers in which they went into all that art history jazz, which was great because, we're learning, and, what we've gotten here is important stuff. And this particular student did a particularly good job in pointing out the fact that it's a psychological experiment and that it negates the urinal's originally intentioned function, which is, again, what we talked about with the bicycle wheel. But then, like the bicycle wheel, you go on and you talk about, okay, it has lost its function, but what about other functions that it has accumulated? And again, remember, we are design history. Design is form and function. It's like, what does this do? Okay, it no longer does it. Well, then what might it still do? And so for that, we go to another look at the photograph of the porcelain figure, and we can see that, well, it's called a ready-made, right? And it was recently, there was a poll of 500 British art experts, and they voted Fountain the most influential artwork of the 20th century, even beating out Demoiselle about that. And so, we can also think from design history about William Morris, about the British arts and crafts movement that went and said the artisans deserve the kind of respect that right now are only going to the artists. The wallpaper designers deserve as much consideration as any Rembrandt or Delacroix. And so here's the next step. Here is the actual artisan turned into artist, Duchamp. By taking this, what he's also done, he didn't just take it and plop it down there. He did something very important in the context of how you use these things. And well, in the first place, people were saying, wow, this is revolutionary because, hey, museums have never had a urinal on display. Well, any men who have been in a men's room in a museum before that know, well, that's just not true because there are urinals on display. So then we go back to, okay, what do they use it for? So let's say that we've gone and we come into the gallery, and instead of the urinal, which Duchamp called fountain, is the plexiglass is removed and you have free access to it. As I say, Duchamp loved the idea that you can be able to touch the art. You can be able to spin the bicycle wheel. He was very much a revolutionary in so many ways, too many to count here. But again, look at this and think about what you would do in terms of functionality, okay? Fine art, forget about fine art free of functionality. That's something that we've got art history classes for. So there you are, and depending on the height to which it is from the floor in the museum, you would be more or less able to feel that you could walk up to it and actually use it, okay? And use it still. But the function has been repurposed. That's part of what the art is, and that's part of what Duchamp is all about. He is working on so many levels, you can't believe it. And oh God, I just sounded like you know who then. I can't believe it, it's the greatest. And okay, so there you are. You walk in, you go, okay, never mind that I'm in a museum. I gotta go. So you use it. And the functionality has been changed. So what happens now is you see that pipe sticking out of the front? I mean, so far this is a very male-centric piece of sculpture, even to the point where that pipe is not just a pipe, but is also been transformed. And if you were to use that urinal, what would happen? The bottom line is, remember, Duchamp is a single panel cartoonist, and the name that he gave that sculpture, that ready-made, is Fountain. Okay, and now we have the signature. He submitted it anonymously to an exhibition, and so there are various takes on what the Armut could mean. The German Armut means poverty, and Duchamp did say that the initial R stood for Richard, which is slang in French for moneybags. And it's also probably on solid ground that Armut is also a play off Armat. The company that produced the fixture, there was the Paris sewer pipes for one thing, and it's also the Mott Iron Works, which is actually a plumbing fixture company that's based in the Bronx. Okay, so Duchamp's living in New York right now, and Mott Iron Works is the one that manufactured the urinal that Duchamp transformed. And the reason that I also Armut, he said, had to do with the Mutt and Jeff character, and so I chose this particular comics cover because another ready-made that Duchamp did was this one. This was suspended from the ceiling, or is when it's exhibited in a museum, and the title that he gave this is In Advance of a Broken Arm. Okay. So now we take one more look at this piece before we depart. Take a look at the outline of the shape, the contours, right? Imagine negative space and such, okay? So, it's also transformative. It could have religious connotations, or in this case, because of all the genital reference, sacrilegious connotations. But yeah, take a look. There's the Buddha, and continuing the religion motif, there is Madonna, okay, the original. And so the shape, it's the same. It's got all these wonderful associations. And what does that get back to? It gets back to the fact that Marcel Duchamp really, really, really loved effing with notions of what constitutes male and what constitutes female. And so one of the things that I have done already is I've set up the discussion board on Brightspace. So, and any of you want to discuss anything that you see in the slideshow I'm showing you, feel free to do it. But I've also called out a couple of instances where basically I stamped discuss on the slide as a cue. Hey, this might be something interesting to think about and get your take on it, because I'm definitely interested in everybody's take on everything I'm saying, so please consider that. Okay, and now we're going to transform from Dada to Surrealism, and the way we're going to do it is by going to Man Ray, okay? A New Yorker among the artists who started out as a Dadaist and became a Surrealist, so it's good to take the journey with him. Actually, you can see there his real name, Emanuel Radnitsky, is a New Yorker that, yeah, there he is. Okay, that was when he was a Dadaist, he was doing his own take on Duchamp. And, remember, take what we've been talking about in terms of purpose. It's like in art class, art history, you'll get around to them saying, okay, ready-mades lose their purpose when they're made into fine art. Well, yes, and more. Again, this is all, when you're taking your midterm and final, it's all about analysis. So let's do that exercise again. Let's take a look and imagine that this is a functioning iron, and it functioned the way it functioned in 1921. We all know what it does. So we go and we set up our ironing board, and we put clothes on it, and then we imagine it in use, okay? And there's where you see that Man Ray was pretty hostile. I mean, that's something that we'll just leave it at that point. But, as you can imagine, what would happen to the clothes with Gift, again, when it's upturned, just as Duchamp's urinal was upturned, or in this case, downturned, I suppose. So there's Man Ray's sculpture in the Dada period. Man Ray was also surrealist, and his, here he is, here's his take on Magritte, right? And so as a painter, he was okay. Where he really shone was in his photos. And we're going to be showing a couple more of those momentarily. And whoops, that went quick. Okay, there we go. And so this is Merritt Oppenheim, is one of the under-recognized members of Dada. And you can see that is a photo by Man Ray using a special technique he was popular for in the 1930s. And I think the table is pretty much self-explanatory. But I am just going to show you one of Merritt Oppenheim's work, and you can go obviously look at plenty others. And it's another ready-made fixed, okay? So this is one of the ones where, again, I'm about to put up the discuss stamp. Okay, so I'm not going to discuss it myself. But just again, while you're looking at it right now, I want you all to go through that exercise. Go through the same exercise of having it refunction, okay? Having the urinal still serve a function that acts differently. Having the iron still serve a function that acts differently, okay? So here we have a cup and saucer, and we have, what I'm going to do is instead of talking about it myself, I'm going to quote Robert Hughes, a very famous art critic in the sense that for over 3 decades, he served as Time Magazine's art critic. And if you get a chance, you should see his 8-part series on art at PBS. It's called The Shock of the New, and I'm sure it's available for free here and there, and it's really worthwhile. Basically, it's 8 one-hour takes on modern arts. And basically, his approach is different than mine, but there's still a lot of wise guy tongue-in-cheek going on there. So he's definitely worth checking out. And he's worth checking out in this case because about what he had to say. So Robert Hughes said, perhaps the most durable of surrealist objects was made by a woman, okay? A teacup on a saucer with a spoon. And okay, everybody has repeated the exercise that we just did with the iron in their mind. Okay, here's Robert Hughes' take on it. The artist bringing her lips to a hairy receptacle full of warm fluid makes Oppenheim's cup the most intense and abrupt image of lesbian sex in the history of